Hello everyone, it's George from Ireland. Well, it's a year yesterday since Sir Keir Starmer was invited to Buckingham Palace and given His Gracious Majesty's commission to form a new government. So Sir Keir was invited to kiss hands, which is a physical action when becoming Prime Minister. It's not filmed, this. I'm told that he simply brushes the hands with his lips and so on. A photograph is taken, though, because Sir Keir leads the Labour Party, which commands the confidence of the House of Commons. So he won a landslide victory with 411 seats, only slightly eclipsed by Tony Blair's new Labour victory in 1997, when things can only get better. Well, things have only got worse in most areas since Sir Keir became the key holder of number 10 Downing Street. So he appointed his Labour cabinet straight away. There were really no surprises in who he appointed. How did it go so badly, so quickly, from catastrophe to calamity? And that honeymoon was quite brief. Their poll ratings are terrible. Now, they won this 165, or was it a seat majority? I think it's 165 now because a few have had the whip withdrawn. On not quite 34% of the vote. Bear in mind, in 2005, when Michael Howard led the Conservative Party, the Tory Party lost that election with a similar share of the vote, with 33%, like 33.2 or something, and Starmer's got 33.9. So it's all about the differential. The essential statistic is the percentage point difference between the biggest party and the second biggest party. So Labour up on 34%, round up slightly, and Tories down on 24%. That 10 percentage point ahead lead, that made all the difference. Why the Conservatives are down on a miserable is at 121 seats, so about 190 fewer than Labour. So then they came in promising not to raise tax on working people. What's a working person? Sounds like a silly question. Does that mean anybody who works full-time or part-time or either, or what? Does it mean any working class people? And what's the cut-off for working class? So they'd allow themselves some leeway there. It was a constructive ambiguity, as they used to say in the Good Friday Agreement. So they said they were not going to raise national insurance on people. They were not going to raise income tax and so on. They have raised other taxes. Rachel Reeves, the Chancellor of the Exchequer, and they never miss an opportunity to remind us, she's the first woman to hold that post. And she then discovered, what was it, the £22 billion black hole? I think the datum kept changing. Found that out, despite all the figures being shared with her for years beforehand. The woman who also lied about how long she worked at the Bank of England, what she did at the Bank of England, and so forth. So she has been a disastrous Chancellor. The only one who's a bit worse than her is Kwasi Kwarteng, despite them both having seemingly stellar CVs. I mean, obviously, he's a real alpha brain, Dr. Kwarteng. But she had this banking experience. So they said they wanted economic growth, and they've hardly achieved that. Economic growth has been anemic. Now, just because I'm castigating Labour doesn't mean I'm saying the Conservative government was good. It wasn't. It was bad. It was rancorously disappointing in many ways. They failed on many fronts. Their successes were few and were limited, and so on. So it got off to a bad start. And so they said they were going to have the fastest growth in any of the G7 economies. Well, that is a forlorn hope. So that's been going really bad for them. They were going to smash the gangs, a 3-word slogan, hard-hitting, like Rishi Sunak's now much mocked stop the boats. Well, they certainly failed to smash the gangs, almost as though the police and the government weren't attempting to do so beforehand. And I don't know what they've done, essentially, in addition to smash the gangs. The French police have not been very cooperative. I mean, they pierced one inflatable boat the other day, but they could do that all the time. So it's not been very effective. Anyway, illegal immigration's risen drastically. It was already terrible, and then it's costing the taxpayer goodness knows how much to keep people in hotels. Then obviously got to have healthcare. There are also some good ideas that Danish socialist prime minister, she says if you've got any valuables, jewellery, we'll confiscate them to defray the cost of housing you. Or I can't remember who it says, was it even a Labour MP saying, and if we do grant you asylum and a right to work, you're going to have to pay us back for those hotel costs over decades. Like university fees, fair enough. And so on. You told us we saved your life. So we ought to get gratitude because you could have been killed in your homeland, if not tortured, persecuted, something like that. Anyway, so the Labour government wanted to reduce legal immigration as well, and has had some success for that. That was one of the few bright spots, partly by simply continuing the Conservative Party's policies. Goodness. And then on immigration, ethnicity, they said no national inquiry into these grooming gangs. That would be a far right dog whistle, said Sir Keir Starmer. Labour wasn't going to jump on the bandwagon. And then they did jump on the bandwagon. So it was never a what right wing, far right dog whistle. Was he lying? Which time was he lying? The first time or the second time was he lying? And he did it solely for cynical electoral calculation. And all right, you'd expect nothing better from any politician. And so we go on. Now, they said they would continue to aid Ukraine, and they have continued to do so. We're ever more urgent as the United States has reduced military aid to Ukraine, sometimes cut off intelligence sharing. You know, the military aid was back, now it's stopped because the Americans claim their stockpiles are too low, and blah, blah, blah. So, I mean, Labour's achieved cordial relations with the European Union, and, you know, the EU politicians could scarcely contain their glee. They thought Labour coming back, Labour would have a more collaborative approach to them, and indeed that has happened. Now, Sir Keir has managed to avoid offending Trump, whose nose is put out of joint very, very easily indeed. Play to his vanity, saying, oh, you're getting this singular honour, a second status. Well, it's not because Trump is special, it's because he's the first one since Grover Cleveland to have a non-consecutive second term. Well, I suppose actually, apart from that, there's also a new monarch since Trump was president. So even though it hadn't been non-consecutive, he would have got one because he'd had a state visit under Elizabeth II. He could now have one under Charles III because it only happens once during the term of a presidency and the reign of a monarch. So we go on. So managed not to offend him. So that was very difficult. Didn't take a view on the America's unprovoked attacks on Iran because obviously it wouldn't play well in Washington, D.C. if Sir Keir denounced this illegal aggression against the Islamic Republic of Iran and so on. Now, Sir Keir has been a bit more critical of Israel. They've not recognised Palestine. But really just done nothing to speak up for human rights. All right, they stopped a few exports of these weapons, which we knew would be used to target Palestinian civilians, and so it goes on. So they did raise public sector workers' pay, and I would have done so for the police and the civil service and the armed forces. You really need to attract more people to the armed forces. But why for the civil service? Did I say civil service? For the doctors and nurses. But we have no difficulty recruiting civil servants, no. Now, it stopped the strikes, that's good, but it's whetted the appetite for more of them. And private sector people are saying, why should you have to pay more for the public sector people? Things aren't going up. Out of sheer spite, they put up value-added tax on school fees, which has caused some schools to go bust. It's caused thousands of people have to change school in the middle of the school year, pile even more pressure on the state schools, which are teetering on the brink of collapse already, and so on. So that was showing that Labour really is the nasty party and is anti-pedagogical. But one thing is they kept the two-child benefit cap, which was highly contentious, a big rebellion which he faced down in the early days, withdrew the Labour whip from some people because he had to show them who was boss. But it's gone very badly for Labour and considered this is the easy part. It only gets harder from here on in. So Tony Blair, say what you like about him, mass murderer, I say, evil, vicious, cruel, bastard, psychopath. But he's politically astute. And he says you've got to be audacious at the beginning when they've got the huge majority, a lot of goodwill behind you. Do it now, because you'll only leech away authority. And after several years in government, people who thought their government might get promoted haven't been promoted. They find a bit of courage. They're no longer going to suck up for the hope of promotion. Some people have demoted, sacked as ministers or whatever. Even the ministers would be willing to lose their jobs in some cases. So they'll only get more fractious. And they're quite oppositional Labour MPs against their own party at the best of times. So there have been a number of volte-fasts they performed. So they took away the winter fuel payment from pensioners. I think it was earning over £37,000. Now, but wait a second. Think of working people, minimum wage, about 24,000 quid. How come you get this fuel payment if you earn 37 grand but not 24 grand? Just because you're a pensioner? That's not fair, because pensioners turn out to vote in huge numbers. And remember, pensioners almost never have dependent children and have mostly paid off their mortgage. So they're far better off than most people in their 20s and their 30s, salaries under 37 grand. But anyway, so they couldn't afford the £300 a year fuel allowance, and then they reversed that and so on. The welfare bill, they're forced to whittle that down, so that's been a failure. They're not finding the £5 billion of savings. They've increased employers' national insurance contributions, a tax on jobs, so a number of jobs available is contracted. Graduates are coming out to a fairly bleak job market, and. Now, they claim that they're going to get down the waiting list. They've had very limited success on that. And I know it's like Frank Dobson, the Labour health secretary under Blair to begin with said it's like turning around a super tanker. If you press stop, it's a very long time before it stops, and it's a very long time before it turns around. So really, there have been few successes, and they've been, again, modest successes. There have been a number of failures, and it's only going to get worse from here. So I think Starmer's goose is cooked. I don't think he's going anytime soon, but I cannot see him leading Labour into another general election. He is a vote loser. He's absolutely bereft of charisma. And unfortunately, they say that Angela Rayner is the most likely one to get it. As I understand it, it's really one person, one vote for Labour. I don't think they whittle it down amongst the MPs. That was the system that Sir Ed Miliband introduced, that elected Corbyn. So probably be that absolutely witless ignoramus Angela Rayner. But she plays well. She's a sort of leftist Trump, a complete thicko who makes, academically subnormal people feel good about themselves. Whose garbled grammar and mispronunciations and all these solecisms and malapropisms, that appeals to a lot of people as having some sort of a proletarian authenticity. So, heaven spare us that, but I don't think it's going to happen. All right. Thanks for watching my channel. Make sure you subscribe on Patreon, donate PayPal, georgecaller790gmail.com. Goodbye.